Hello and welcome to the final session of Social Work Week. That sounds amazing to say that. It has been it's going to been a brilliant week. We've had lots and lots of sessions across this week. Thousands of social workers attended, and it is great to get to this point. A little bit exhausting, I'll be totally honest, but really exciting to bring this final session to you. Appreciate everyone attending. I know it's Friday afternoon, and people will be nearly finishing up for the weekend, so really appreciate people's time. My name is Matthew Devlin. I'm the Head of Strategic Engagement at Social Work England. I've got a few housekeeping slides to do, and then we'll get into the session for today. So, quick legal disclaimer: any views, information, or opinions expressed by third parties during Social Work Week are the speaker's own and do not necessarily reflect the views of Social Work England or its employees. Social Work England have not endorsed third-party content and accepts no liability for the content of third-party or sector-led sessions held throughout the week. The privacy notice: your privacy is important to us. By providing personal information such as your name, email address, you agree to us contacting you for the purposes of event management and evaluation. Your personal information will be used solely by us for this purpose it is collected for. Personal data will be retained for up to 3 years in accordance with our data retention schedule. So on to today's session, exploring the value of data in social work. So just to quickly introduce the agenda, and I'll let people introduce themselves when we get to their item, but just to run through what the next 56 minutes is going to look like. So I'm going to cover a little bit on the strategic objectives of Social Work England, specifically in relation to data. And then I'll hand over to Emily Starr, who's our Insights and Analysis Manager, who will talk about Social Work England's approach to data and insight. Andy Leverton and Gwyn Jones will then take over to talk more specifically about a piece of work and a case study in relation to data and insight. We'll then hear from Rini Aliong, who is the Regional Engagement Lead. Title's just got much bigger. And now the Regional Engagement Lead for the Yorkshire, the Humber and the North East of England to talk about the insights that we gather from the sector as part of this, part of the approach of the Regional Engagement Leads. And then we'll hear from Sarah Range, the Head of Practice, Governance and Information and the Principal Social Worker for Southend-on-Sea, to talk about how data can inform practice. And as I said, there'll be a little bit of time at the end for Q&A. So as I'm talking, add questions into the question and answer function on Teams, and we'll bring them in at the end. So just a bit of a summary in terms of Social Work England, and I suppose some of my reflections really. So I joined Social Work England back in 2019, and that was when we become live as a specialist regulator for all social workers in England. So our role as the regulator is to protect the public and to raise the standards of social work practice in England. For me, I've been a registered social worker now since 2019, and social work's an incredible profession. I'll tell anybody that will listen to us how amazing I think social workers are and the impact that social work can have and does have on millions of people across the country and across the world. We've heard from international speakers this week, and it's incredible to see the impact that social workers can have across the globe. There is a reality that social work is an incredibly complex profession. Social workers work in a variety of roles in lots of different organisations. And for us to be able to drive the profession forward as the regulator, there's a real requirement for us to have a deep understanding of the profession. We need to understand where the profession is. We need to understand the type of roles that social workers are doing, the data that we hold as a regulator, but also the insight and the intelligence that we hold. We recognise that puts us in a really powerful position to drive the profession forward and to protect the public as well. Our 2023-2026 strategy, which you'll see on that slide there, or one of the objectives on that strategy, and within that strategy you'll see on that slide, talks really specifically about us as the organisation sharing the data and insight that we hold about the social work profession and our regulation. Now, our our objectives and our commitment to sharing data hasn't just started in 2023-2026. It goes back to when we first become the regulator in 2019. For me personally, my previous role, which was the regional engagement lead in the Northwest, that was a big part of what all the regional engagement leads have done over these last 4 or 5 years in taking the intelligence, taking the data that we hold as an organisation and taking that into the profession, but also bringing back in insight from the profession as well. It's been a really big part of what we've done. I've talked a lot about the register. I've talked a lot about what the register looks like within the Northwest over these last 4 years and tried to inform and have conversations with people that are working within the profession to try and support recruitment, support retention, just support conversations and to drive forward change within the profession. And being able to do that from a sort of data and insight-led perspective has been really important and something that all the regional engagement leads have done consistently over these last few years. There's been some really big pieces of work that we'll cover today, but we into 2023 we shared the State of the Nation report, which was a sort of accumulation of 3 years worth of reports around just what social work practice looks like, where it is, how people are coming into the profession, how long people are staying in the profession. That was a huge piece of work and a huge report. That was a one of a kind really for the profession that we were really keen to deliver. And still on the website now for people to review, and something that we're keen to do in the future as well. We've also more specifically shared some of our data in relation to diversity and fitness to practice. We've shared just general fitness to practice data in terms of the types of things that we see coming through, the types of concerns, the number of concerns, the way that we're able to progress concerns, lots of data being shared consistently around fitness to practice. We also share data in relation to overseas applications, and we'll continue to do that. We, for the first time during the last renewals window, we shared active and live renewals data in terms of the sort of progress of renewals for social workers. And again, that was a really important step for us to be able to support all social workers on the register to be able to comply with the requirements of renewals. Going forward, and again, we'll talk about this in more detail over the next sort of 40 minutes, 50 minutes. But we're really keen to develop this area of work, particularly for me and the regional engagement leads, how we can continue to share data, share intelligence around fitness to practice is going to be a really important part of what we do over the next few years. We've spent a lot of time establishing a single point of contact network, which is within all local authorities, which enables us as an organisation to work closely with local authorities and key people within those around fitness to practice, the concerns that we're receiving. Our aim going forward is to really broaden out that network, so it includes all major employers of social workers, but also develop the work that we do with the single point of contact network on fitness to practice. So we can share trends and themes, insight, data, intelligence, not only to improve our own fitness to practice processes, but also to more proactively resolve concerns before they enter or before they meet the threshold for the fitness to practice. That's a really important part of what we want to do as an organisation, and will form a lot of what we do over the next couple of years and beyond. And the regional engagement leads are gonna start doing some of that work shortly. For me, and I'll end on this before I hand over. For me, I think data is incredibly powerful. I think recognizing that as an organisation is really important. But for me, it's only powerful when it's shared, when it's reflected, and then it's used to inform. And I think that's the bit that we're really keen to do as an organisation and built into the next strategy for us. And will feed into lots of different work that we'll do over the next few years. I will stop rambling at this point and will hand over to Emily, who I will bring on screen, and I will take myself off.
Thanks, Matthew. Hi, my name is Emily Starr, and I'm the Insight and Analysis Manager at Social Work England. And I'm going to be talking today about our approach to data and insight. As Matthew mentioned, we have been producing and developing our data and insight approach since before we went live in December 2019. And to this end, we have achieved some significant milestones along the way. For example, we have established and developed our data analytics capabilities through both our data and insight team and our data management technology. This has in turn allowed us to produce rich datasets relating to our different functions as an organisation. Whilst these datasets initially focused on our internal performance, we've started to go further in considering what insights we can give about the social work profession. As such, we have commissioned several pieces of research, including the recent publications on perceptions and practice education. We have also started to share more data through regular releases on our website and through publications such as the Social Work in England reports and the recent analysis of diversity in our fitness to practice process, which we will be talking more about in this session. Needless to say, these are just a few of the examples of what we have achieved so far. Throughout our work, we remain focused on being both data-driven and evidence-led. This means we can gain deeper insights into the work we do and ensure we make improvements that are based in evidence. I think it is probably helpful at this point to explain what we mean by some of these terms. So, data is the raw information that we can collect. This includes numbers and text, or any other type of information that can be recorded. Insight is the deeper understanding that we gain by applying analysis, context, and knowledge to our data. Insights, therefore, come from both within Social Work England and from the wider sector, and they help us to uncover patterns, relationships, and trends in our data. Being evidence-led means we must consider these insights and use the understanding that we have gained to inform our decision-making and our ongoing work. Ultimately, by being data-driven and evidence-led, we can use these insights to continue improving our regulatory approach, which will help us to better protect the public, to deepen our understanding of the social work profession and its impact on society, to ensure our processes are both safe and fair, whilst also measuring the impact of our work to do this. And finally, to make sure we are using our resources in the most effective way, with a sustained focus on development and improvement. An example of how all this comes together can be seen in our work to examine diversity in our fitness to practice process. So I'll now pass over to Gwyn, who will talk about this in a little bit more detail.
Although I am just going to step in and talk a little bit first, if that's all right, Gwyn. So I'm Andy Leverton. I'm the Head of Business Planning and Improvement at Social Work England. Part of my role is to oversee the fantastic work that Emily and Gwyn do. Gwyn's going to talk a little bit about the analysis that we published in September 23. But before we get on to that, I wanted to just talk a little bit about the journey that has led up to the publication of that report in September 23. Because like others have said, that's the use of data has been part of our ambition since day one, since before we launched, and we've worked hard to get to where we are now, and particularly with the analysis of diversity data in fitness to practice. Our work there goes back to prior to our launch. We consulted on the information we would collect as part of the registration process in summer of 2019. And to get ready for our launch, all we collected at that point was data on date of birth and gender identity. And we always knew we would want to collect more information after we'd launched, after we'd put all of the organisation together. So we were able to build a richer picture of diversity across the register, across fitness to practice. So in 2020, we started discussions about what other information we would collect, how we would collect that, how we would make sure it remained optional, because it's not in our rules, it's not part of the registration process, but we absolutely wanted people to provide that to us because we knew how important and valuable it would be. So by the summer of 2021, we'd agreed how we were going to do that, what questions we were going to ask, and we started to collect the data. And we did that through your online social worker accounts. We put some banners on our website to try and prompt people to provide that data. And we quickly found that there was only limited response to that. And I think we ended up with about 4 or 5% of social workers providing the data to those additional questions, which obviously meant we couldn't conduct much meaningful analysis with that level of data. So in early 2022, after the 2021 renewal process had closed, we started to think about how we might encourage high response rates, what else we might do to make sure we get that valuable data. And what we agreed to do was to put some questions at the start of the renewal journey for the 2022 period. Again, those questions remaining totally optional, but hoping that if they were the first things that people saw when they came to renew their registration, perhaps they would provide that data and people had the option to skip those questions. So we launched those ready for the start of the 2022 renewal period, and we were delighted to see that by November time, as greater numbers of people started to renew, that we had got a really high response rate. And after the renewal period had closed, we found we had data for around 95% of social workers on those additional diversity questions, which was fantastic, but also somewhat daunting at the same time, because we knew then that we had a vast amount of rich data and needed to start thinking about the analysis and what we would do with that, how we would ultimately use that to take that first step towards making a difference. And then early 2023 was when we started to do that initial analysis, work out what the data was showing us, whether there were any gaps in that data, what we could conclude from the data, what we couldn't. And at that point, the temptation was to do a really detailed bit of analysis that looks at absolutely every aspect of the data. But at the same time, we realized we had to be really clear on what the headline results were, which Gwyn will talk about in a minute, because the data we've got could keep somebody busy for years in terms of the depth and richness of analysis that we could get into. But balanced against that was also the importance of sharing some of that data and making sure that we could help others to understand the insights that we were seeing in that initial bit of analysis. So by summer of 2023, we had a first draft of the report and we started to think about publication. And then in August 2023, Gwyn joined the team and we threw him straight in at the deep end and told him what we'd done so far, asked him to check that it was all okay and help us get the report ready for publication, at which point I shall hand over to Gwyn, who's on mute.
Apologize about that. So thanks very much, Andy. My name is Gwyn Jones. I'm the Senior Data and Insight Analyst at Social Work England. And I'm going to speak to you today about that piece of research that we published in September of 2023. So this was an initial analysis of diversity data in our fitness to practice process. And it was, and as Andy alluded to, a culmination of several years of analytical work. This research was the first of its kind that we had produced, and over time, along with further analyses, this will help us ensure fairness in our fitness to practice processes and increase our understanding of the social work profession, and ultimately identify where social workers may be impacted by inequality or discrimination. Now, what I wanted to show here on this slide was some of the underpinning elements of this piece of work. So our strategic ambitions, our plans to achieve them, our commitment to implementing positive equality, diversity and inclusion action plans, and our role and duty as the regulator of social workers in England. The principles of EDI are fundamental to our strategy to 2026 and are embedded in all of our activity. This strategy commits us to using data and insight to inform our plans and address any inconsistencies we identify in our fitness to practice processes. Our Equality, Diversity and Inclusion Action Plan outlines our commitment to build a better understanding of the makeup of the social worker register, to use diversity data to monitor impacts on different groups, and to take steps to deal with bias and discrimination. And in addition to these, there is the public sector equality duty. So this is a section of the Equality Act that requires when we undertake our duties, we take steps to eliminating discrimination, advancing equality of opportunity, and fostering good relations between those who share a protected characteristic and those who do not. So what I wanted to get across here was that it's these three driving elements that really underpin why we did this analysis and what we're looking to get out of our research both now and in the future. Slide, please. That's thank you. So when planning our approach to the analysis, we met with statisticians from the General Medical Council and also the Nursing and Midwifery Council to learn from their experiences in publishing diversity data like this and also on this scale. Both the GMC and the NMC are established regulatory bodies with a track publication record of diversity and fitness to practice data. So it was a really good and positive experience to be able to discuss our plans with them and iron out our methodology. We also sought independent assurance from an academic expert outside of the regulatory sector to provide further advice on our intended approach. In addition to this independent assurance, we also made sure we were aligned with methodological approaches outlined by national organizations for the collection and analysis of data. So these included the Office for National Statistics and the Cabinet Office Race Disparity Unit. So these government organizations provide guidance on how comparisons should be drawn with data and how data relating to ethnicity should be reported on across a range of topics, including things like crime, education, and health. We use guidance from these organizations to monitor disparity in our data and identify the best methods to report on our findings in this publication. Next slide, please. To conduct our analysis, we used a data set that we extracted on the 31st of March 2023. So we used a fixed point in time for all of our analysis. Our fitness to practice data included all the cases we received since we became the regulator for social workers back in December of 2019. So that's a record of all the referrals we received and all the data relating to the progression of those cases through the various stages of the fitness to practice process. Our data set was something we were actually really quite proud of. To sort of reiterate and expand on what Andy had already gone through in his section, when we started gathering that diversity data in June 2021, we only had that 4% response rate. However, as a result of launching a communications campaign and including diversity data in our renewals process, we significantly increased that data set. So by the time we pulled the data in March 2023 and had approximately 95% of social workers who had shared at least one aspect of diversity with us, it put us in a really solid position for our analysis and work. We have diversity data across a range of characteristics, and these include things like age, gender identity, sex registered at birth, disability, sexual orientation, ethnicity, religion or belief, and nationality. Next slide, please. Thank you. So on to our findings. We examined our fitness to practice process at key stages, initial referral and referral to hearings, as well as progression rates between triage and investigations and the case examiner and hearings, all in relation to the diversity characteristics we hold about social workers. We found that social workers who are aged 40 and over, male, and who are of Black, African, Caribbean, or Black British ethnicity were all overrepresented at initial referrals and hearings. So what we mean by this is that social workers in those groups were disproportionately represented in referrals received by us, and also in the cases that got to hearings, based on how much of the register they accounted for. So from the table here, we can see that although social workers aged 40 and over only account for 66% of social workers, they accounted for 71% of the initial referrals we received, and then 82% of the cases that went to hearings. So a smaller percentage group accounted for a higher percentage of referrals. This trend was also seen across all three of these groups in their initial referrals and the percentages of their cases that reach hearings. For each of these three groups, we can see that they similarly account for a larger percentage of referrals and cases at hearing than the proportion of the register that they represented. We also see this pattern of overrepresentation evident for these groups in their case progression rates from investigations to hearings. All three groups had higher progression rates at these stages of the fitness to practice process than we expected, based on the proportions of the register that they accounted for. We undertook testing to ensure that these findings weren't due to random variations in the data, and so we're confident that they're not due to chance. It is important to note here, very important, that it doesn't tell us about the reasons for our findings, just that they're not due to chance. Next slide, please. So, to summarize, understanding the role that diversity plays in all aspects of our work is a key part of our strategy and the work we do as regulator. When looking at the diversity in our fitness to practice process, we found that certain groups were overrepresented at referral, cases reaching hearing, and also in key progression rates. This publication represents our first step on a longer journey towards a more complete understanding of fairness in our processes and the actions that we must take in response to our findings. Over time, this and further analysis will help us to identify where social workers may be impacted by inequality or discrimination. It will help us better understand the impact of our policies, and it will also help us build a more accurate and detailed picture of the social work profession to help us ensure fairness and equality in our processes. Next slide, please. We are now moving forward with what we're calling phase 2 of our work, in which we're going to examine these findings in more detail to understand disparities in our fitness to practice process and associations with social workers' characteristics. We will be sharing findings of this research with our network of contacts at every local authority and working with them to explore the potential impact bias, prejudice, and discrimination play in the concerns raised about social workers. We will use the insight gained from our current and future analyses to improve our regulation and our processes and take direct action to address any identified differences. We have established an advisory group to support the planning and delivery of future research in relation to equality, diversity, and inclusion, and to advise on the implementation of any identified improvements in our processes. And we will also incorporate the findings of this research and any future analysis into our core learning and development pathways to inform how we train our people to ensure that our processes are equitable. And we're going to ensure that this research feeds into the discussions we're having as part of the National Workforce Roundtable to influence the work of the other regulators. And that's next slide, please. I'm going to hand back to Emily now.
Thanks, Gwyn. Our work to further look at diversity and fitness to practice is a key priority for us, but we are also looking at other ways we can build on our use of data and insight to support our decision making. As such, other areas of our future work also include analysing our registration processes and fairness and timeliness, looking at how we can better understand the routes to becoming a registered social worker, being proactive in publishing more data and insight on our website, using data to evaluate our economy, efficiency and effectiveness. And importantly, we will continue to engage with the sector through various approaches, such as the upcoming annual social worker survey that we are launching on Monday, the 25th of March. Activities like this will help us to continue gathering and using valuable feedback and insight to inform our work. And now, if I've got it right this time, I'd like to hand over to Renee to talk further about insights from the sector.
Thank you, Emily. Hi, everyone. My name is Renee Aliong. I am one of 6 regional engagement leads at Social Work England. I'm also a registered social worker. And the work of the engagement team helps us to build relationships within Social Work England and with everyone who has an interest in social work by working with a range of stakeholders in different regions. One of the core functions of the engagement team is to help us build a rich picture of what is happening in the sector across the country. And this is achieved through the work of the 6 regional engagement leads, who are all registered social workers and are responsible for engaging with the sector in their specific region. Another responsibility of the engagement team is to help embed Social Work England's professional standards by working with people to ensure that our standards are understood and consistently met, as well as addressing where this might not be the case. Another key function of the engagement team is to foster productive relationships within the social work sector and within our regions. We gather data and insights by engaging with and speaking to different groups such as students, newly qualified social workers, principal social workers, employers, social work academics, and people with lived and learned experience of social work, and also other regulators, as Gwyn had pointed out. Some of the engagement events within the sector include, we hold in-person engagement events that we attend. We have regional and virtual drop-in sessions. We have continuous professional development and reflective sessions with fellow social workers. And we also are privy to and take part in the single point of contact network and the principal social workers network, and generally in contact with major employers of social workers through those networks. Other areas the regional engagement team contribute to planning and delivery of Social Work Week. So weeks like this week, we plan and deliver Social Work Week, and we support areas of policy development within the organization. And we work generally across the organization to input and develop in policy areas and any areas for change within social work. Next slide, please. So in essence, the regional engagement team serves as a bridge between the organization and the diverse regions we operate in, providing context to Social Work England's strategic aims and fostering productive relationships within the sector. And as you will see, there are some perspectives from the sector that have been fed back through our regional engagement activities. Themes from the sector that have come out through our engagement are ongoing concerns about recruitment, including the high turnover of social workers and struggles to recruit at the right levels. We've also had feedback that developing local and regional strategy to manage recruitment, so recruitment is a theme, and then the increasing international applications for qualifying courses and the supported year in employment programs. And we have concerns about high agency usage and impact on experiences of people who access social work services. And some Social Work England themes that were specific to the organisation that have come out through our engagement are specific requests for clarification about continuous professional development requirements, particularly peer reflection. We've also had positive feedback about the ease of renewals and the helpfulness of the continuous professional development sessions that we hold both locally within our region and nationally that are virtual sessions. We've had queries about timescales of international registration applications as well, and queries from employers and individuals about the process to return to practice. Now, these are some of the perspectives from the sector that have been fed back to us. In particular, in response to workforce challenges, which have come up quite often within the social work sector, Social Work England have facilitated the National Workforce Roundtable in order to coordinate discussions at a national level. This is a strategic group formed to look at priority issues relating to social work workforce across the whole profession. And its purpose is for system leaders to provide expert reflections on policy and delivery issues, to agree collective action and to steer work carried out by and agreed by the delivery of subgroups and work streams within the National Workforce Roundtable. So that's just an example of some of how the engagement that we do within the region feeds into, and drives the policies within Social Work England. I'll now pass you over to Sarah Range, who will introduce herself.
Oh, thanks, Renee. Hi, everyone. I'm Sarah Range. I'm the Principal Social Worker from Southend and the National Co-Chair of the Principal Social Work Network for Adults. And I'm going to speak a little bit about why data is important to social work practice, to just give a bit of practice context to taking data into working directly with people. So next slide, please. I think the first thing to say is that the Principal Social Work Network, our leadership team, really welcomes and acknowledges the deep dive that Social Work England has done into the data to fitness to practice, and appreciate that at this point in time, the data is still quite experimental, and that we need to work together to understand what is that data telling us. And the network is willing and very much engaged in wanting to take action with our partners to ensure that equality, diversity and inclusion are the central cause in our social work practice, and that all colleagues feel supported and included in the work we do with people. Next slide, please. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit about data in terms of real term and what it looks like in social work practice. So I'm going to tell you about a story about a real social worker named Alison, and Alison's kindly shared her story with us today. And she's got a really, I don't think unique story, but really interesting story. So Alison's love for people and her interest in social work was piqued with the sadly tragic deaths of two young women, Jasmine Beckford and Tyra Hendry, when she was 14. So Alison heard about their deaths when she was a young person and felt really inspired to want to make a difference and to work with people. So it drove Alison into the career of social work, and she's had a really varied career. So she's worked across children's and adults. She's got extensive practice experience in working in child protection, emergency duty service, adult social care. She's also managed fostering services. So she's got this wide breadth of actual practice experience. But her career pathway took a bit of a shift, and she moved towards her love of data. So she was a social worker with a secret love of data and understanding everything numbers. So her career has moved her into the more business analysis space and project management. And in that space, she's taken her social work practice infused with data, and it helps give a bird's eye view, linking together practice, procedure, processes and performance. So in her work, Alison has an absolute passion, and anyone who knows her will know that, an absolute passion for ensuring that whatever we do to provide the best outcomes for residents is through supporting operational colleagues by making sure that we have excellent information, data and analysis to help us think about trend and the needs of our community, to give us an idea of where we can zone in really quickly to make improvements, to think about how we manage pressures in our operational services. So she provides us information and intelligence to do that. She also helps us evidence the requirement for the services we commission and provide, so making sure we've got really inclusive, diverse services that meet people's individual needs. And her work also helps us support the evidence-based decision making. So helps social workers on a day-to-day basis, managers, practice leaders, helps us make really robust, good decisions because we have really solid data sitting behind us to draw upon and interrogate. So in her data analysis job, she applies every day her social work perspective, looking at logic and patterns within the data and analysing it and helping us to identify trends, and applies those to the social services, the social sciences, and uses the social work approach. So her work is absolutely vital, and she's one person in a performance and commissioning service. There will be hundreds of people in your own services across the country that do that vital task for you all the time. So next slide, please. So this is just to remind us, this slide, what is data about? So behind data, behind numbers, people's lives, actual people. And it's to try to help, this slide is trying to help us remember that when we're looking at data analysis, reports, KPIs, all of those things that help us determine the functioning and health of services, it all boils down to these are individual people's stories, individual people's lives. So it helps us just ground back into the fact of the privilege that we have to work alongside people whose data forms part of our rich picture of how our services run. Next slide, please. So why should social workers care about data? And I think this is a really interesting challenge, because I think social workers sometimes struggle with understanding or engaging with data, because our first love really is to be out in the community working alongside people. But data is becoming even more important, and colleagues at Social Work England really gave some strong illustrations about how data helps us understand the world in which we are functioning from a professional point of view. So for us as social workers, simply put, data can actually change lives. So when we look at data, there's a range of different elements that social workers will have touch points with data. We will use data to think about, are we meeting people's needs on a person-centered basis? Are we upholding and embracing human rights? What do we use the data for? Do we apply that against analysis? And does that then allow us to draw evidence-based conclusions about interventions and options that we can offer people in terms of solutions in their lives? So data helps us monitor progress. So thinking about how we monitor progress gives us a better chance at interventions being successful. Data helps us with ethical decisions and ethical practice, and underpins our decision making. Helps us predict trends and inform methods of intervention, and it can help bring research to life, to understand that whatever you're reading in a research paper, there are people's real lives experience sitting behind that. Helps us to make sure that from an equality and diversity and inclusion perspective, that representation is key. Do we know who we're working with? Do we understand what outcomes they want to achieve? Do we know how to tailor services and support for people? So are our resources, so are our caseload sizes, are our financial resources, are our staffing resources, is everything being distributed equally, and is it in line with plans that we have from an individual micro level all the way up to a macro level in terms of, strategic management of adult social care budgets? Data is important to regulators. So, for instance, the Care Quality Commission and Ofsted, data is important to them, and they take a view on the fitness of organisations that they regulate based on interrogating our data. So, data, we can use data for things like looking at place-based versus neighborhoods versus citywide planning. So are we using our joint strategic information well to commission services, thinking about holistically about a person? So it provides feedback. It can give us qualitative views as well as quantitative views. It helps us look at demographics and services. It helps us inform performance plans. It helps us think about long-term planning in local authorities. So, how are we planning for not only the in-year that we're going to deliver services, but how do we plan for future generations to make sure that we cut our resources equitably? And it enables and allows us to be intelligence driven in all the work that we do. And it helps us with safety. So thinking, for instance, is the information we hold about the quality of a placement, is the data that we hold, is that telling us that by using that particular service, somebody's going to live their best life? So data in a nutshell, simply put, can actually change lives. Next slide. So how do social work leaders use data? So I've explained a little bit, but I'm going to give you some examples from actual local authorities. So next slide, please. Okay, so from actual local authorities, when asked the question, so how are you using data to inform what you do? We've had a number of local authorities share their experience. So one local authority talked to us about their example when they looked at the number of social workers that they had and whether it stacked up across other local authorities within their region, measured against their adult population or the numbers of adults receiving care. They were in a position to see that their numbers were so different and so stark in terms of their significant resources being diverted. So they were able to then move resources and increase the number of apprenticeship intakes that they had. So they were actually able to increase their staff base, give people more of an opportunity to train as social workers based simply on looking at their data as it compared to other people in their region. Another local authority explained about how they modelled some of their data to look at the demand for mental health social work services. And in one local authority, it showed that an additional 85 individuals were being supported and that the volume, cost and complexity for those individuals was also increasing. They noticed that a presentation of younger women showed a noticeably sharp upturn. And by looking at the data, they then were able to interrogate and explain why the resource pressures were happening in terms of budgets being overspent. And it helped inform their commissioning work and their engagement of public health to give context and also plan some future trajectories so that they could really plan forward their services to meet their in-year pressure, but also grow their service. And the other local authority shared with us an interesting piece of work they've done within their race equality network. So they spoke to minoritized people about their experiences of adult social care. So they got to do some of that community engagement and conversations. And they think that that's actually helped their teams to realize that filling in protected characteristic data that we capture is useful. So sometimes the challenge can be that we ask a lot of demographic information, and sometimes it can feel, as social workers, it can feel intrusive. But if we're going to holistically understand all of a person, we have to understand the data. We have to understand their particular personal information that then translates into data. And in this local authority, it's helped this local authority learn and see trends. And it's helped the social workers understand that and feel confident about asking those questions because they can understand the importance and the relevance to help make sure that care and interventions, conversations and services are as person-centered as possible. So next slide, please. So, okay, so data can shine a light and can amplify voices. So it data in a social work context in practice helps inform research, highlights the areas that we need to develop practice, where we need to maybe make some investments, and where we need to design services differently, or to actually do more of what's actually working well. And ultimately, data helps inform and support our decision making. So I've just put a few links that might be useful for people that have different perspectives around social work and data, and some really key studies whereby you can see very strongly the voice of practice where data is influencing that practice development. So I hope that's useful, and I'll now pass over. Thank you.
Thanks, Sarah. I'm just going to stop presenting and then add everyone else onto the screen because we're just moving into the Q&A now, so I won't bring any slides on the screen. We have had some questions coming in, but if people have got any additional questions, add them into the Q&A because we've got a little bit of time now to answer some questions, which is good. Sarah, I'm going to come to you first because we've had a question that you've probably already answered, but just if there was anything that you wanted to elaborate on, because I think it is a really good question about all of which we've talked about, like how does that impact on frontline social work practice? Because if I'm to think back to when I was in frontline practice, which I'm not anymore, background in adults, I would have probably asked the same question. So all these conversations that we're having around the sort of insight, the data, the intelligence that we gather, like how does that work its way into frontline practice and influence?
I think, thanks for the question. I think it's I think data from a social work perspective for a frontline practitioner, it is more than simply feeding your client data set in your client database. It's about taking your part in weaving a rich picture for your local authority about, the fabric of your community. Who do you provide support to? Who do you have conversations with? What do people want? And how can your leaders and your politicians make the best decisions possible to be able to allocate resources to meet need and demand? And also something as simple as numbers help your managers and your practice leaders make sure that your caseload is of a safe size, and that any areas of complexity or risk that is escalating are really quickly identified so that people get the best quality experience from you as a social worker.
Thanks, Sarah. And just to add as well, because I think, and I maybe touched on it a little bit at the start, but just in terms of the data that we hold on the social work register. So we know that there's around 100,000 social workers on the register. And when you say that, it's an incredible number. And I always think that that's an incredible number when I say there's 100,000 social workers in England. And I'm very proud to be able to say that. But what we recognise as the regulator, that there's much more to that data that the profession needs to know. Breaking that down into adults, children's, breaking that down into specific roles, breaking that down into regions. I know that there's 13,500 social workers in the Northwest, but having that data and being able to use that data to inform conversations with the likes of the DFE, with the likes of the DHSC, with the likes of other big organisations that are all sort of striving forward for the same goal for the profession. They all want to achieve sort of positivity and develop and grow the profession. Having that accurate data in terms of what the register looks like, in terms of the age of the register, in terms of the ethnicity of the register, all of that data that we hold is really powerful to inform conversations that ultimately might feed into workforce teams within areas to think, well, we have got a gap, but we know that there's social workers within the Northwest. How can we try and attract those social workers from the Northwest, either back into frontline practice or into our organisation? And I think us as an organisation, we have that information, we have that data, we have that intelligence, and being able to sort of use that and inform conversations like in the National Workforce Roundtable, like feeding it into the PSW networks, feeding it into our areas like the regional engagement leads do. I think that's really powerful. And for us as an organisation, we still need to work on that data set. We need to understand it more internally, but then there's real power in us then being able to share that externally. And that does ultimately influence and impact on frontline practice, because hopefully that'll mean that there's more social workers on the front line that can be able to support with all the valuable work that's being done. That was a long answer. I appreciate it. And there's more questions coming in, which I don't want to ignore. There is a question around recording, which I'll just quickly answer. Yes, it's been recorded. It'll be made available on Social Work England's YouTube channel around April time. Emily has asked a question around, do we record a reason for departing the profession? Emily, I might come to you around that. I know the answer.
Yeah, so we do record reasons why people leave the profession, and that's something that we have internally at the moment. I think it's information that we will start to look at more and do more with over the coming years. But yes, we do record those reasons.
Yeah, thanks. And just to add to that as well, because I think what we see is when social workers completely leave the profession, so voluntarily remove themselves from the register. We have that information, we have that data, and we have that insight. I think what's much more valuable is when social workers just leave roles, because what we know is that the register is actually growing. The register is getting bigger every year, and we see more social workers joining than what we see leaving. But I think there's more value in us than being involved in the conversations with the organisations that employ social workers to understand why social workers are leaving roles, remaining on the register, still offering incredible value to a different role, but maybe stepping out of frontline practice. I think there's real value in getting to grips with that a little bit. Sarah, I don't know if you had anything to add on that.
No, I just really echo exactly what you're saying in heavy support of that.
Thanks, Sarah. That's always nice that people just agree. Gwyn, this was a question for you. What tools or methods are we using to ensure data equity? I'll mute, Gwyn.
Okay, sorry about that. Yeah, so as I sort of alluded to in the presentation, we consulted externally, so with the colleagues at the GMC and the NMC, so we reviewed our sort of statistical methods with them. We followed all the available government guidance. So I'm not sure if the person asking the question has provided detail what we mean by tools. I'm not quite sure.
It didn't. No, it didn't.
No. I mean, we use a lot of, we sort of ensure all our data is thoroughly cleansed, and there's several different analysts working on any piece of analysis at any given time, so we sort of cross-check our work that way. And I suspect this might not be the route that they're going down.
Sorry. No, thanks, Gwyn.
Emily, I wonder if did you have anything to add on that question, perhaps? Or
no, I was just thinking about the tools part. I suppose we used some statistical software that we do to test our data and do statistical testing, like Gwyn said in his presentation, that we test our data to make sure things are not down to random chance or random variation in the figures. So that's some of the tools that we use as well. We have, as Gwyn mentioned, validation approaches internally, and then we've progressed those to get external opinions and perspectives on the ways that we're approaching our analysis and our data. So I think we have several mechanisms in place for making sure that we're using equitable approaches and various tools as well to support that.
Thanks, both. And Sarah, last one for you, and just conscious of time. There's a question around sort of, do we feel as though there's a gap in, I suppose, the education and training or the CPD for social workers around data and how it can be used in practice to really sort of, I suppose, support the work that people are doing with society?
Yeah, I think that's an absolutely excellent question. And yes, I think my answer, my experience tells me yes. I qualified in America, and we, as part of our bachelor's degree, you have to take a statistics course, like a whole year's statistics course. And I think that's really helped me in terms of having that understanding and that kind of love of understanding how data knits the story together. But I think most certainly it's been the subject of conversation around how can we help social workers and managers really understand what data is trying to tell them, and really get underneath the data, because I think that is definitely probably an area for further discussion and development from social work courses, and also from further development courses for managers as they start to matriculate throughout their career. So yeah, excellent question. And I think that, questions like that and topics like this is what feeds into the roundtable conversations about what can we do as system leaders, because it won't just be, registered social workers, it will be all, everybody who works in social care. So it's wider, it's care workers understanding data and provider services. So it's, data touches various points. So yeah, excellent question. And most certainly, I think it is an area that we need to do some focused work on nationally.
Yeah, and there's a few different elements to it, isn't it, in terms of like how to use tools to gather data, but then also how to analyze it as well. I think that is equally as important, isn't it, to be able to do both of those things. Yeah, I would echo that. Okay, I'm really conscious of time. I appreciate those questions that we haven't got round to being able to answer, but these sessions never feel long enough. But also, I appreciate staring at a screen for an hour is difficult. Just to finish up then, a huge thank you to all the speakers, Gwyn, Sarah, Renee, Andy and Emily, for giving up your time on a Friday to deliver this session. I think it's been incredibly valuable. It's been a lovely end to the week. It's been a brilliant week this week through Social Work Week. As I said at the start, we've seen great attendance through the week. We've had thousands of social workers attend sessions throughout the week. And we'll share all that. We'll share that data afterwards and reflect and celebrate on what we've been able to achieve throughout this week. There has been an evaluation put in the chat for people to contribute to. Please click that link and provide us some feedback. We really appreciate any feedback. It helps us to sort of grow and develop Social Work Week as we start planning for 2025, which is soon. We do start planning in a couple of months, which is always terrifying to think about. There's also a link to a social work survey in the chat as well, particularly relevant on the back of this conversation. That is just for social workers, but really to support us to understand the profession better, which will feed into all these different conversations and all this different work that we've talked about over the next hour. So I'm going to finish bang on time, which is a huge achievement for me. But thank you very much for your time, everybody, and have a good weekend.